You reach for your phone before you remember why. You unlock the screen not because you need something, but because silence feels unbearable. This is not distraction. This is flight. And what you are fleeing from is far more disturbing than boredom or loneliness. You are running from the part of yourself that exists when nothing is buffering it. Jung called this the shadow. It is the unexamined material of your psyche, the impulses and truths you would rather not see. In earlier eras, the shadow surfaced in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in the discomfort of solitude. But now, you have engineered a way to never be alone with it. You have built a world where the inner life can be postponed indefinitely, where every moment of potential reflection is filled with curated content, notifications, and the shallow dopamine of scroll and swipe. The question Jung would ask is not whether you use technology. It is what you are using it to avoid. When you strip away the screens, even for a week, something begins to surface. Not clarity, not peace, something more uncomfortable. You become aware of how much of your daily rhythm was designed to keep you from feeling. The compulsive checking was not about staying informed. It was about staying numb. Each notification was a small rescue from the inner void. Each feed refresh was a delay of confrontation. And now, without that escape route, the shadow begins to knock. People around you will react to your withdrawal. They will call it extreme. They will tell you it is unrealistic, unnecessary, that you are overreacting. This is projection. What they are really saying is that your choice to disconnect forces them to examine their own dependency, and they are not ready. When you refuse to participate in the constant exchange of content and commentary, you hold up a mirror. You show them what they are also avoiding. And that makes them uncomfortable. So they pathologize your choice. They frame your silence as withdrawal, your discipline as rigidity, your boundary as rejection. But their discomfort is not about you. It is about what your absence reveals in them. The assumption underlying all of this is that you are incomplete without the connection, that your identity requires constant validation through likes, replies, shares, through the algorithmic feedback loop that tells you who you are. This is where the persona takes over. The persona, in Jungian terms, is the mask you wear to meet the world's expectations. It is not false, but it is not whole. It is the self you perform. And in the digital age, the persona has been weaponized. Your online identity becomes a carefully managed performance, algorithmically optimized, psychologically calculated. You become what gets engagement. You edit out the parts that do not fit. And slowly, the gap between who you are and who you present becomes a chasm. The shadow, meanwhile, grows in the darkness. Everything you refuse to show, everything you deem unworthy of the feed. Everything that does not perform well falls into the unconscious. And it does not disappear. It waits. Disconnection is descent. When you remove the screens, you are forced to descend into the parts of your psyche that have been neglected. This is not comfortable. You will feel restless. You will feel the urge to fill the space with something, anything. You will realize how much of your daily structure was built around avoidance. The mornings began with scrolling because waking into silence meant waking into yourself. The evenings ended with screens because sleep required letting go of control. Every transition, every moment of potential boredom was medicated with content. And now, without that medication, you are left with the raw experience of being. This is where the real work begins. Jung did not advocate for repression. He advocated for integration. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, but to bring it into consciousness. It's to acknowledge what has been denied, to make whole what has been fragmented. In the context of digital detox, this means facing what the technology was helping you avoid. Maybe it is loneliness. Maybe it is inadequacy. Maybe it is the fear that without the constant stimulation, you are not enough. These are not weaknesses. They are the material of the psyche. And until you face them, they control you from the unconscious. Integration means sitting with the discomfort. It means allowing the feelings to surface without immediately reaching for the numbing agent. It means recognizing that the urge to reconnect is not about missing information. It is about avoiding the confrontation with yourself. Discipline, in this context, is not punitive. It is structural. It is the conscious choice to create boundaries where the unconscious would have none. When you decide not to reach for the phone, you are not depriving yourself. You are reclaiming authority over your attention. You are refusing to let external stimuli dictate your inner state. This is not about willpower. It is about sovereignty. Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming who you actually are, separate from the collective, separate from the expectations imposed by family, culture, and now algorithm. Discipline is the tool of individuation. It is how you resist the gravitational pull of the collective unconscious, the mass behavior that tells you what to want, what to value, what to fear. When you disconnect, you step outside that current. And in that space, you begin to hear your own voice again. The paradox is that the people who advocate most loudly for connection are often the ones most afraid of what disconnection would reveal. They tell you that you need to stay plugged in for work, for relationships, for relevance. But what they are really saying is that they need you to stay plugged in so they do not have to question their own patterns. This is why shame and manipulation enter the conversation. They will tell you that your digital detox is selfish, that it is privileged, that it is naive. They will frame it as an abdication of responsibility. But responsibility to what? To the constant availability that erodes your inner life. To the performance of productivity that leaves no room for depth. This is not responsibility. This is compliance. And compliance, in Jungian terms, is the betrayal of the self in favor of the persona. What they do not understand is that silence is not emptiness. Silence is the condition under which the unconscious can speak. When you remove the noise, you create space for the material that has been suppressed. Dreams become more vivid. Thoughts become more coherent. Patterns become visible. You begin to notice how much of your behavior was reactive, driven not by choice, but by the conditioned response to external stimuli. You begin to see the projection you have been participating in, the ways you have outsourced your sense of worth to the digital crowd. And you begin to understand that the anxiety you felt was not because you were missing out. It was because you were finally present. The mirror effect happens naturally. When you stop performing, people notice. When you stop reacting, they feel it. Your silence becomes a kind of presence that unsettles those who are still trapped in the noise. They may interpret it as judgment, as superiority, as withdrawal. But you are not judging them. You are simply no longer participating in the collective distraction. And that participation was never neutral. It was a form of agreement, a tacit endorsement of the idea that life is something to be mediated, curated, and consumed. By stepping away, you break that agreement. And in doing so, you show that another way is possible. Not better, not superior, just different. And that difference is what they cannot tolerate. Because if you can live without the constant connection, then maybe they could too. And that thought is terrifying. From a Jungian perspective, the digital world is not inherently pathological. Technology is a tool. But like all tools, it can be used in service of the ego or in service of the self. The ego uses technology to reinforce the persona, to maintain the illusion of control, to avoid the discomfort of the unconscious. The self uses technology as one modality among many, never allowing it to replace the inner work. The difference is subtle but profound. The ego scrolls to avoid. The self scrolls, if at all, with intention. The ego checks compulsively. The self checks consciously. The ego seeks validation. The self seeks truth. And truth, in Jung's framework, is always uncomfortable. It requires you to see what you have been avoiding. It requires you to admit that the shadow exists. It requires you to take responsibility for your own psyche rather than outsourcing it to the algorithm. What emerges from a week without screens is not necessarily peace. It is awareness. You become aware of how much of your life was structured around reaction. You become aware of how little time you spent in genuine solitude. You become aware of the difference between being alone and being with yourself. These are not the same. Being alone can still be filled with distraction. Being with yourself requires presence. And presence, in the Jungian sense, is the precondition for transformation. You cannot integrate what you do not see. You cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. And you cannot become whole if you are constantly fragmenting your attention across 1,000 external demands. Creativity does not return immediately. Neither does focus. What returns first is the discomfort of your own company. You will fidget. You will feel the phantom vibration of notifications. You will catch yourself reaching for a device that is not there. This is withdrawal, but not in the chemical sense. It is psychological withdrawal, the recognition that you have been using technology as a regulatory mechanism. When you are anxious, you scroll. When you are bored, you refresh. When you are uncertain, you seek external input. These are not solutions. They are deferrals. And now, without the deferral mechanism, you are forced to sit with the original feeling. This is where resilience begins. Not in the avoidance of discomfort, but in the willingness to endure it without anesthetizing yourself. Human connection changes too. Without the mediation of screens, conversation becomes slower, more deliberate. You notice how much of digital interaction is performative, designed to be seen by others rather than to genuinely communicate. You notice how much energy you spent managing impressions, crafting responses, curating a version of yourself that could withstand public scrutiny. And do you notice how exhausting that was? In-person connection, by contrast, does not require that level of performance. It allows for ambiguity, for silence, for the messy, unscripted reality of being human. This is not to romanticize face-to-face interaction. It has its own complexities. But it does not demand the same constant self-surveillance. And that in itself is a relief. The inner authority that Jung spoke of is not something you acquire. It is something you uncover. It has always been there, beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the persona, beneath the shadow. But it requires space to emerge. And space, in the modern world, is the scarcest resource. Every moment is claimed by something. Every silence is filled. Every pause is interrupted. The digital detox is not about rejecting technology. It is about reclaiming the space in which your inner authority can function. It is about recognizing that you do not need external validation to know what is true for you. It is about trusting your own psyche enough to listen to it. The cost of constant immersion is not measured in screen time. It is measured in the erosion of the self. Each time you defer to the algorithm, you weaken your own discernment. Each time you seek validation externally, you undermine your own authority. Each time you numb the discomfort with distraction, you delay the integration that would make you whole. This is not a moral failing. It is a structural inevitability of a system designed to capture attention and monetize engagement. The system does not care about your individuation. It cares about your participation. And participation in this context is the opposite of presence. What a week without screens reveals is not that technology is evil. It reveals how much power you have given it. It reveals how much of your inner life has been outsourced. It reveals how much of your identity has been constructed in response to external feedback rather than internal truth. And it reveals that you can survive without it. Not comfortably, not easily, but you can survive. And in that survival, in that confrontation with your own psyche, something shifts. You begin to see the screens not as necessities, but as choices. You begin to see the notifications not as demands, but as intrusions. You begin to see the constant connectivity, not as connection, but as fragmentation. And you begin to understand that the benefits of intentional disconnection are not about productivity or creativity or focus, though those may follow. The benefit is the return to yourself. The benefit is the integration of the shadow. The benefit is the reclamation of the inner life that was slowly being eroded by the noise. This is the work Jung was pointing toward. Not the rejection of the outer world, but the refusal to let it colonize the inner one.